This is a special edition of Things I Want to Know Voices. Since the 1950s, the United States alone has lost at least a half a dozen nuclear weapons, and they were never found. Not disarmed shells, not test dummies, real bombs, still missing. The military calls it a broken arrow, a term that sounds neat, contained, clinical, but in reality, it means a nuclear weapon gone astray, lost in oceans, buried in swamps, forgotten in places no one was supposed to know. And all of this unfolded against a backdrop of paranoia. The Soviet Union was expanding its reach, testing missiles, putting Sputnik into orbit. In Washington, politicians whispered of missile gaps and surprise attacks. Every mistake carried the weight of politics. The fear that Moscow would seize on weakness, that Congress would demand answers, and that the public would panic if the truth spilled out. Secrecy became policy. Mistakes buried as quickly as the bombs themselves. The fear wasn't just American. After the Soviet Union collapsed decades later, archives revealed just how paranoid Moscow had been. Soviet leaders, men like Nikita Khrushchev, who once pounded a shoe at the United Nations, believed the United States might launch a first strike unprovoked. They built secret bunkers, deployed doomsday weapons, and pushed their people into constant readiness, convinced that Washington was preparing to pull the trigger. In the West, American presidents from Lyndon Johnson to Ronald Reagan stared back across the divide, each trying to project strength. Their arsenals, they knew, were far from perfect, and in truth, both nations were trapped, staring across the abyss, each convinced the other might be the one to start Armageddon. And one time, they nearly did. In 1962, during the Cuban Missile Crisis, the world edged closer to nuclear war than ever before. Soviet submarines, cornered by U.S. Navy ships, armed with nuclear-tipped torpedoes, prepared to fire. Orders were confused, tensions white-hot. What stopped it wasn't Moscow or Washington, not Khrushchev or Kennedy, but a mid-level Soviet officer named Vasily Arkhipov. Arkhipov refused to consent to the launch. His single act of restraint stopped the Atlantic from erupting in thermonuclear fire, and in effect, saving the world. Picture yourself there, sitting in that submarine, heat rising, men shouting, the weight of history pressing down. One man's hand hovers over the key. Your hand. Would you turn it? Or would you hold back, knowing that once you reached port, a KGB officer or a GRU man might be waiting? Because your defiance could cost you not just your career, but your freedom, your family, and even your life. And then it happened again. 2 decades later, in 1983, with Reagan in the White House and tensions rising after NATO exercises, Soviet early warning systems lit up with what looked like an incoming U.S. nuclear missile strike. Protocol demanded retaliation. But Stanislav Petrov, a lieutenant colonel in the command bunker outside of Moscow, made a choice. He declared it a false alarm. He broke the rules, and in doing so, stopped the Soviet arsenal from answering phantoms with fire. Twice, the fate of the world came down not to superpower leaders, but to mid-level officers who refused to let paranoia dictate the end of humanity. And that truth should be shouted. The world didn't survive the Cold War because of presidential speeches or Kremlin posturing. It survived because 2 men, one in 1962 and one in 1983, had the courage to say no when the machines and the orders demanded yes. Twice, everything hung on their defiance. Twice, civilization was one trigger pull away from extinction. That's not stability. That's survival by chance, resting on the coincidence of men history nearly forgot. Meanwhile, ordinary Americans lived under a constant shadow. Families dug out their basements, stocking them with canned food and water. Concrete and cinder blocks were sold as protection against the fire of the atom. In schools, Children crouched under wooden desks as film strips told them duck and cover would save them. This was theater, not safety. But it gave parents a ritual to believe in, something to cling to, while knowing deep down that if the bombs truly came, there was nothing they could do. Fear became routine, preparedness became performance. But the lost nukes, what about them? Well, it began in 1958. Over the quiet skies of Savannah, Georgia, a B-47 bomber collides midair with a fighter jet. To survive, the crew jettisons its payload, a 7,600-pound hydrogen bomb. It plunged into the water off Tybee Island, and it never came back up. The Navy searched for weeks. Nothing. The Air Force later concluded there was no possibility of a nuclear explosion and had a low environmental risk if it was left undisturbed. But the truth is simpler. They never found it. Somewhere under those waves, the Tybee bomb still waits. Then 3 years later, in the cold night sky over Goldsboro, North Carolina, a B-52 comes apart in midair. 2 nuclear weapons fall with it. One floats down safely by parachute. The other slams into a swamp and vanishes. Investigators later revealed how close we came. One low-voltage switch kept that weapon from detonating. Most of the bomb was recovered, but portions of a secondary component remain buried in that field to this day. Imagine the politics if it had gone off. Kennedy, just days into office, forced to explain how his country almost annihilated one of its own states with a thermonuclear blast. Picture the farmer who owned that land, walking out the next morning to find twisted metal in his fields. Not just wreckage, but a bomb that could have erased him, his family, and half the state. But the disasters kept coming. In 1966, over the coast of Palomares in Spain, a mid-air collision scattered 4 hydrogen bombs. Yes, 4. 3 hit the land, 2 ruptured and spread plutonium, while 1 stayed intact. The 4th disappeared into the Mediterranean, and for 80 tense days, divers scoured the sea until they pulled it up. The Spanish government demanded answers. Washington scrambled to reassure allies. And behind closed doors, officials feared Moscow's propaganda machine would paint the accident as proof of America's recklessness. But the truth, 2 of those bombs split open and scattered plutonium, the very fuel of thermonuclear fire, across Spanish soil. 2 years later, a bomber on airborne alert crashed into the sea ice near Thule Air Base in Greenland. The conventional explosives in its weapon ignited, spreading plutonium across the ice and forcing a massive cleanup. Danish politicians raged at the secrecy while the Soviets accused America of hypocrisy, condemning Soviet risk while its own arsenal lay scattered in the Arctic snow. This pattern was clear. America's nuclear arsenal wasn't untouchable. It was fallible. It was human. And every time one was lost, the silence around it was political armor, protecting reputations, but not people. Then the losses piled up. Officials spoke the same words each time, but no immediate danger doesn't mean safe. It just meant they didn't know. Nuclear bombs, built to end civilizations, scattered across oceans, buried in mud, hidden beneath ice. Weapons of annihilation unaccounted for, still waiting. It's very easy to just blame the Americans, but the Soviet Union, China, and others inevitably had the same losses, just no one was told about them. So, Project Broken Arrow isn't a myth. It isn't conspiracy. It's the record, and the record says this: the world's most destructive weapons aren't always where they're supposed to be. We survived by chance before. Hopefully, luck stays on our side. The weapons haven't gone away. The United States, Russia, China, France, Britain, India, Pakistan, Israel, North Korea all hold nuclear arsenals. And beyond them, more than 20 other nations have claimed at one time or another to pursue, possess, or shelter nuclear capability. and that shadow has only grown longer. With that submarine commander refusing to turn the launch key, years later Petrov and his eyes fixed on a console that is blinking red, and a child crouched under a wooden desk, whispering into the silence, while outside, the threat of thermonuclear war loomed. That is what the nuclear age leaves us with. Human faces waiting in the dark, knowing that fire could erase everything and was only one decision away. Thank you for listening. This is Things I Want to Know Voices. If you like what you heard, send me a note congratulating me on being such a great speaker. If you don't, well, send me another note congratulating me on being a terrible speaker. Either way, I'm good. Send your email or correspondence to paulg@paulgnewton.com.